Welcome to the Sanctuary Podcast. Angel Deer is a medicine man and offers his work on sacred land through shamanic healing, energy healing, sound healing, breath work, plant medicine, and workshops and events. The Sanctuary is a community for all those who seek healing, transformation, ancient wisdom, and a place to come together to create a new way of living and relating. This is the Sanctuary Podcast, and this is Angel Deer.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm glad you're joining us again for this new podcast, and today we are going to talk about death, which is a heavy subject in many ways, but all of us have been confronted with it sometime from very early in our lives or maybe more recently. And to talk about death, I have a dear friend with me, Laura Silverman. And Laura has this beautiful blog, Gluten for Life, and she does foragings and she writes about food, and I really love what she does, so you should check out her blog. And I'll put that on the description of the podcast and on the email, so you can have a look to it. So, hello, Laura. Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So I know it's not an easy subject, and I got inspired by that. So I lost my grandfather in November, and I've been sitting with that subject for now 3 months, and I was like, I really need to talk about it. And then you posted something about death, and I was like, hey, why don't we get together and talk about it?
I think it's a subject people need to talk about more.
Yes, definitely. It's so, in our society in the West, we were talking a little bit before the podcast, and we were really talking about how we're far away from it in many ways. And when we travel to India or in Eastern world, death is so integrated into society. We bring children to funerals, we see bodies burning, on the Ganges, and all the family there. So I want to talk first about what's your relation to it, for you. What is your relationship with it? Did you fear it at some point in your life? Have you changed? What's your relationship today with it?
Well, one thing I want to mention is how much death comes to the fore in a different way, I think, when you're living in nature. Because, we live in a place where you're constantly seeing death and renewal happening in this cyclical manner through plants and the seasons, but also through, the animals that are around you. Death is it's very present when you're living in nature. And I think, I was writing about it a couple of weeks ago because there was a beautiful grouse that had come to live in our yard, this wild chicken that usually is very shy, but he was quite tame, and he lived with us for several months, and he was actually hit by a car in the road, and it was somehow kind of disproportionately upsetting to me. I had grown really fond of him, but also I think there's a way in which when you've experienced death, all of the deaths that you have known come back to you every time you experience another death. There's a way in which they kind of link, and one reminds you of the other. So my relationship to death, it goes back to, the first big death, if you can call it that, I guess, was my father died when I was 26, and he had cancer, and I spent several months living in my parents' home, helping to care for him as he died. And it was a very confusing time for me because I had left my life in New York thinking that I was going to go and help my father get well. But he had kind of already decided that he was ready to die. He'd been through a lot of treatment and it wasn't working, and he was resigned to dying. And so we had this little bit of a clash of wills, and ultimately I had to come to grips with the idea that his death was up to him. And that was deeply affecting.
I'm sure it was. And really it makes me think about, we're not really preparing for death in many ways in our society. So when death comes around, through sickness, especially cancer and things like that, we're really trying everything to make the life continue. We're really not allowing even elderly people that maybe don't have cancer, and maybe have some just failing organs. We're trying to keep them around as long as possible. And to me, it's very connected to the fact that we're not prepared and we're not okay with it. And so that preparation in traditional societies or, in native Indians, for example, traditions, or in the Eastern world is much more present because you're facing it. You know that the meat you're eating, for example, you've seen the animal died. So you have that connection just by your food. Mm-hmm. You're probably closer to nature, as you mentioned, where you see the cycles. I mean, right now it's the winter here. And it looks very dead around, but we have some evergreens and we still have some animals, and so we can still see life, but it looks a little bit more dead in many ways. So we come to fear death in many ways because anything we don't know, we fear it.
Totally. And I think the idea of fighting it, with no thought for what might it look like to be more accepting of death or more ready for death, we don't even have an opportunity to explore that.
No, we don't. That's true. We don't have any. I was trying to think as I was preparing the podcast, what do we do in the Western world? For example, in France, where I'm from, is there anything that I ever teach at school about it, at university, that my parents really taught me? Like, there's nothing. I mean, it's quite interesting that, it's such a big thing because we're all going to face it at some point. And we're all dying every day a little bit because we're going on that way. My teacher used to say, by the moment you come out and you take your first breath,
you're dying.
Death is coming towards you.
That's
already.
Right. That's right.
But somehow it's something we don't want to think about until we have to face it through the death of people that we love dearly around us or through our own death. So how do we prepare really? I mean, do you do anything? Do you practice around that or...
I think all of life is a preparation for death. And if we're truly mindful, it can be a beautiful thing because I think my goal is to die without regrets. And so that means living in a very particular way. And I do prepare for death. I think about it and I think about it in relationship to my life. And I don't know if this might sound weird to people, but I'm ready to go at any moment.
No, I don't think it's weird. I think it's beautiful. And it reminds me, there was this study, and I think maybe people are listening, I've read it before, and you can go online and look for it, but there was a study done towards the dying people in hospital, and they asked them questions, what are their regrets, what are the things they want to talk about. I don't know if you remember that study. It went around, it is really tapping into what you just mentioned. They said that they're regretting that they have not lived exactly the life they wanted.
Well, nobody regretted not going to the office enough.
Exactly.
Or not having enough money.
Or not seeing the last movie, or not doing all those things, shopping, or not buying the last, car or anything. It was really connected to the people that we love.
Yep.
So one of the regrets is not spending enough time with them. Mm-hmm. The other one is the one you mentioned, which is not having done exactly what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So not having taken that risk to do and have waited a little bit too long. Mm-hmm. So that's the preparation. And in fact, the beauty, I think, of that preparation for death is making us more alive. It's really about being way more alive, being awake and being in life, being, aware of what's going on. So there's something very powerful in preparing it.
I watched the HBO documentary about the life of George Harrison, and he was very spiritual and obviously studied Eastern philosophies, and I think he probably thought a lot about death during his life. But towards the end of this, I think it was a 2-part film, I was really struck and inspired by something his wife said, which was that on his deathbed, he lit up the whole room. She said it was a dark room, but as he passed, the room was illuminated in this really brilliant way. And I have carried that image with me. It really inspired me to think about how I want to feel at the moment of my death. And of course, I guess we can't all choose the moment of our death or the way in which it will happen, obviously, but I think there's something to be said for being prepared for it, to understand that it's even if you don't have any religion or anything like that, because I'm pretty much an atheist, but I do believe that death is a passing into something, and it's something that feels blissful and loving.
Yes, it's beautiful. And the natives, native Indians, say that there is no death. There's only a change of world. We're just changing into another world. And it's, it might be difficult, if we don't believe in anything, to see it that way. But there is something powerful there. So we're coming closer to death. Let's say we prepare it and then death happen. I want to talk a little bit about, how do we prepare for it, about what religious scriptures and I would say some religious practices have said out there. There's a little bit of that conditional behavior that we need to have to make sure that once we pass, we're not burning in hell, or we are going to the right place, and etc. Which is not exactly what the scriptures are saying. It's more being interpreted. I would say the messiahs, maybe that's not exactly what they say, because they talk more about love than hell out there. But really, there's none of that in native traditions all around the world. Not only in America, South America, ancient paganism in Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, where all the shamans are. Right.
I mean, so maybe part of the fear of death that we have in Western culture is because of this fear of judgment at that moment, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're going to be judged for your sins. So if you don't have to worry about that, if you're not reflecting back on your life with horror at all the things that you've done wrong.
You're listening to the Sanctuary Podcast with Angel Deer. While you're listening, browse the website at www.thesanctuaryheal.com.
That's beautiful. So that judgment we are afraid from God is in fact self-judgments, because that's what people come to realize on their deathbed, really.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful image. I really like it. And it makes me think of the Egyptians, that kind of weight your heart and see, all the good and bad things you've done, and say a little bit, okay, are you going to be able to transit? They were very aware of that and making sure in their life, they were doing good things just to make sure they could continue transitioning into their next life and into the right place. And once we're dead, so what happened? What do you think happened? Where are we?
I mean, I'm kind of a Taoist, so I believe in nature, and I think that, all matter doesn't disappear. So I think our energy just goes back into the cosmos, and I don't know.
I think nobody knows, so I'm not pretending I have an answer. And there is this, I like to, there's a couple of, I think, hints we have. There's the people that have near-death experience, so people that have been dead for maybe a minute or 5 minutes, 10 minutes sometime, and come back. And what strikes me, and there's a beautiful study from a professor from Harvard University that passed away a few years ago that dedicated all his life studying near-death experience. And what struck him is that every person on this planet, whatever their culture and their background, whatever their environment, the type of place they live in, their religion, all describe the same thing. And so he was really interested into that. And also many people came back with informations or visions of things that they could not know. And one of the example I have in mind is that guy that was in surgery and he went into a death, so his heart stopped. His brain stopped completely, and they tried to reanimate him, and I think he went for 7 or 8 minutes, which he was clinically dead for 7 or 8 minutes. Mm-hmm. Clearly no brain function that we could not see. And he described that he went out of the room, he went through the wall, into the next surgery room, so there was another surgery then, and he went into the walkway, and then he was called by the light, and he was called back into his body. So he was like, okay, I'm going to come back. So it was like coming back under his table, surgery room, and from under the table, he went back inside his body. Wow. So then he woke up, and he was, talking to the surgeon, and he described to him what happened. And the surgeon didn't, really agree with him and say, well, this is not possible. The problem is that he described perfectly what was going on in the other surgery room. He described the woman that was on the table. He described how many people were there. And he described something so specific that under the table of surgery there was a brand of that table, which he could not have known. And he said, there was these stickers on there with the brand, and there's the numbers next to it, which I think the reference number of the table.
So even in death, you're super observant of brands.
So somehow, yes, he could see all that and describe that. And there was it's one of the cases that this professor studied, says there was no possibility that without getting out of his body in some form of awareness that he could have witnessed that. And there is many other, description of things like that. So to me, I think they are interesting about, what happened. And I just want to talk about the experience of my death of my grandfather that passed away in November, as I was in the church, and he was, dead for now a few days, 4 or 5 days. And I was praying there, and I was sitting in church, and I saw Mother Mary, which is funny. I'm not born and raised Christian. I've never prayed to Mother Mary, really. And I saw Mother Mary up above the altar behind the priest with big arms open. And I saw my grandfather walking towards her. And she was smiling and beautiful. And he was looking younger. And he was looking back at her, smiling. And she was telling me, that's what I heard, that she's welcoming him because he lost his mother when he was very little. And, he had three daughters. So one of them is my mother. And so she was the one sent to welcome him, and he was going to be okay. He was going to be taken care of. And there was all those women behind. And I think his mother was there.
So was this like a vision that you had it revealed itself to your mind, or did you actually see it in the church?
Well, I saw it. I saw her like that with arms open, and I saw exactly how she was dressed. She has a lot of lights around her.
Wow.
I saw him. He was telling me it's okay. Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It could go. So that's my experience with it. I would say that's my only experience where I experienced something very mystic. And then for days and weeks after that, I felt his presence around me. And in many ways, I was holding my grandmother for a while, and I could feel him, almost in my body, wanting to touch her, using the physicality of my presence to be close to her. And my grandmother would start crying when I feel that without me saying anything.
Wow.
She would just start crying very, very deeply. So there is something for me, and I really believe, we come back and we are in those forms. But definitely there is a great mystery and a great question on that.
That's very lucky. I mean, I wonder how much of it has to do with how open and receptive you are, because I was married to somebody who died of cancer. And he was sick for quite a while. He died in the hospital, and he actually waited for me to leave the hospital until he finally died. And I was actually going to the funeral home to make arrangements for his cremation when he died. And my friend that was there called me, and I turned around and came back very quickly. He was still warm when I came back, and I went to embrace his body, but strangely, I just had an immediate sense that he wasn't there. And when I went to speak to him, I found myself looking up at the ceiling and speaking up to the ceiling. I just instinctively felt that he was above us, already.
So you're the only atheist that I know that speaks to the ceiling.
Yeah, well,
But you felt it. This is the thing.
Yes.
We somehow know. We somehow have that connection, whatever our belief system, whatever we learn.
For sure. But for months and months afterwards, I desperately wanted some sort of sign. And I, quote unquote, prayed for a sign from him. And I wanted to somehow see him but no, I didn't get that. And it was a little disappointing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we don't know, I guess, sometimes maybe they go quickly, they transition quickly.
Yeah.
And they're just down here. I don't know.
Right. But I do still call on his presence, and I ask for his protection and guidance. He lives on in me,
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah, we always say we only truly die when the last person that have known us is passed.
Right.
We're still alive in people's heart. That's very beautiful. I want to talk a little bit about something before we kind of end the podcast, about this Native Indian tradition, which is that ceremony that is done when someone has passed. And the way they describe death, they say death is that person that comes inside your house with a big stick. And death takes that big stick and smashes the fire that's burning in the middle of the house. And as the fire is smashed, ashes fly all around and goes inside everybody's eyes and ears and lungs and on your face, and you're breathing it. And because of that ashes that goes in your eyes, you start crying, and you can't stop crying because you have those ashes in your eyes. Because of the ashes going inside your ears, when people talk to you, you're a bit numb, you're not hearing people anymore. They talk to you, but it kind of goes through, you're not really hearing them. Because it's in your eyes, you don't see the beauty of the world anymore. Sunset, maybe you're not interested by it. Because it goes in your nose and in your mouth and in your stomach. You don't taste the food anymore. Things lost their taste. You lose the appetite. Maybe you're probably sick and you don't want to eat anything. And so they do that beautiful ceremony where they go around every one of the family members, and with beautiful feathers and soft cloth, they clean your hair, they clean your eyes, your ears, your nose, and your stomach. And I thought it was a beautiful way to, allow people to, see the symptoms, see what they are, why they are here. It's a beautiful imagery. And then they turn towards the sunset, where the death are and the death goes, and they ask the whole family to stop crying and to let the dead people go away, because they say if you're too sad, they're going to want to hang out around. They're not going to want to go away because they're still, in between. And so I thought it was a very beautiful tradition, and the grieving tradition, we don't have it anymore. We don't really have much of people going around and we know they lost someone, unless we know them and we've read on their Facebook. We don't really know that anymore.
Right. So, I think it would be really helpful for us if we did have some rituals, both to prepare for death and to grieve and mourn people that have passed, so that we would have a process to go through. Yeah,
that's very true. So I invite people, I think, as we're finishing, is ready to think about the preparation. And you mentioned some beautiful things to do about, being very alive, and look for that interview of dying people and what they say. So take that as, okay, I don't want to think of that the day I'm dying, but prepare it for it. Look in ancient tradition, native traditions, what we can do to hold space for people that are passing. And look also, in a lot of those philosophies, what is done when someone is gone, to grieve in the right way, to help support people either around you or, even in yourself if you experience death. I can tell you that, my grandfather passed away 3 months ago now, and I'm in that state of joy despite that great pain and loss that I experienced. Somehow, because I did a lot of practices around that and really trying to connect and to understand what death is about, I just see that as a transition. And in my head, I always smile and I look in the sky and say, well, until we meet again.
That's wonderful. That's so uplifting. And I think it's a great model for people to reach out and embrace death as part of life, and instead of being afraid of it.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for coming. Thank you for talking about that subject that might seem very heavy sometimes, but in fact, I think there's so much teaching and so much wisdom inside exploring death. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I invite you to look at our other podcasts, to go also on YouTube videos, and to look on the blog, because we have also information around that, and I'll be writing a little blog that goes with that podcast if you're interested to go look at it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
You've been listening to the Sanctuary Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, we're a source of talks about spirituality, personal transformation, energy healing, shamanism, and earth-based practices. For more, visit thesanctuaryheal.com. On the website, you can find out about our events, our retreats, healing offering, our spiritual blog, and you can also register for the newsletter. Again, visit thesanctuaryheal.com. Till next time, this is the Sanctuary Podcast, and Angel Deer signing off.